Hi, my name is Jay. Welcome to the 5th installment of the Rose's digital playwriting course. I'm super excited to have you here today, where we're talking about using our scripts to change the world. Now that's a really big concept. The idea of using our writing to change the world is something that can mean a lot of different things. In many ways, anytime a script is produced or seen by people, it has changed the world. It's impacted kind of the timeline. But that's a very, particle physics-y kind of thing that I don't really know a lot about. So instead, I think what's useful is to consider how we can use our scripts intentionally to make social change, with something called theater for social change. So again, this is a really big concept, and I think a really good way to understand how we can do something like this as writers is to take a look at some examples of what people are doing in the modern day. From those examples, we can learn how we can do the things that we want to do. So let's look at 3 examples of theater companies or groups who are doing theater for social change in order to make the world a better place. There's a really cool theater company in Glover, Vermont, called Bread and Puppet Theater, and they create shows to critique big business, to try and combat social inequity, and to comment on kind of recent political occurrences. The name Bread and Puppet comes from 2 things. Actually, at every show, what they do is they serve sourdough bread, fresh sourdough bread, and they perform with enormous puppets. Their name is also a play on a phrase from ancient Rome, bread and circuses, which, in its time, was basically a criticism of the old Roman Empire, only providing basic entertainment and food to the starving poor man in place of actual social change. What you're watching now is footage of their recent show, A Diagonal Life, Theory and Practice. This isn't my footage, but I was lucky enough to see it in person. The whole idea behind this piece was that a diagonal line is like a vertical line that has been hurt, and is therefore seen as lesser. It's different from the status quo. Using the diagonal as a metaphor, the show explored racial prejudice in the US, the development of invasive species in the rural Northeast, and immigration reform. And from a writing perspective, what's so unique about Bread and Puppet is that because all of their shows are based on these puppet creations, and from telling these stories using puppets, they write the scripts in ways that need and necessitate puppets as characters. It influences how the characters act, it influences the kind of things they can do logistically and metaphorically. It changes the kind of characters we can portray when a character can be a 30-foot tall puppet. If you want a monster, it can be something that looks like an actual monster. There's also a really great company called the Tectonic Theater Project that's based in New York City. So basically, the Tectonic Theater Project is based on exploring how real life can come to the stage, and they do that through a process of devising called moment work. Basically, what they do is they take the most important moments of a situation or a scenario, and they break it down so that they can be highlighted in the play. Sometimes the phrase documentary theater is used to describe them, which isn't exactly accurate, but is super helpful in understanding the kind of work they do and how they do it. The most famous piece from the group is called The Laramie Project, which was a play written by compiling interviews from people in Laramie, Wyoming, following the murder of a young man named Matthew Shepard. In the show, we learn through a series of interconnected interviews that Shepard was actually murdered for his sexuality. In the Laramie Project, 8 different actors play up to 60 different townspeople in Laramie. We get an insight into how they act, how they think, how they reacted to the news. It's a chance for us to see a real-life perspective on a real-life tragedy. This is where documentary theater comes into play. It's the idea that while there is kind of like a narrative going on, there's an argument being made explicitly in the play. It's focused on informing and inciting action in the audience, putting the next steps in their hands, the call to action. The last thing that I want to talk about is something called the Theater of the Oppressed. So Theater of the Oppressed is less of a company and more of a movement. It was started by a man named Augusto Boal in Argentina in the 1970s. In Theater of the Oppressed, there's many, many different functions, but probably the most famous is the idea of forum theater. Basically, there's a group of actors who present an audience with a concept, an idea, or a scene. And in that scene, there's an act of oppression going on. The audience will see that scene play out up to the climax of the scene, at the highest moment of interest. And then it stops. This is where someone called the Joker comes in, basically serving as a narrator. The Joker turns to the audience and asks them how they want the scene to end. The power goes back to the audience to try and combat the oppression that they're seeing on stage. It's an open book. For instance, if it's a scene depicting bullying, how can the bullying end with the audience's interaction? Sometimes the audience will also be invited to participate in the scene. They'll be asked to come on stage and be an active participant. They'll kind of rewind the whole scene and start it from the beginning. Augusto Boal used these ideas into implementing legislation in Argentina in the 1970s. It impacted day-to-day political decisions. Naturally, you know, in these kinds of scenes, there's no end. One half of Freytag's pyramid is no longer here. And so what's super important in writing these kinds of scenes is that, how do I put it? You need to be successful in building up the first half of the pyramid even more than you usually would need to be. So here's the thing. This is very large and kind of hard to grasp. You might be asking yourself, you know, that's great, there are examples of people writing and changing the world. What does that mean I can do? Other people are doing it. That doesn't mean that I can just do it now because I know that they're doing it. And how am I supposed to write about such big ideas that I might not have experience with? That's just the thing, is that theater for social change starts at the smallest of levels and then it can grow. The things that matter to you are the things that you should write about. And if you want to change something in your world, no matter how small it might seem to you, using theater is the perfect tool to try and make it happen. Theater is the tool that you can have your voice be heard. And as a writer, you're letting your thoughts go onto the page to have your voice be heard. With all of that being said, let's talk about this week's writing prompt. I want you to consider something in your life that is making you less than happy. In the framework of your plot, addressing that thing, whatever it is now your climax. What do you have to do to get there? What happens after? When does the happy ending come in, if at all? It's all up to you, really. I want to thank you for joining me in the 5th installment of the Rose's digital playwriting course. I'm super excited to continue this project and to connect with you at home. Please join me next week when we start talking about breaking the fourth wall. I'll see you then. I just don't know.